Hi, this is Mark McCullers, principal of McCullers Group. I'm going one-on-one with ADC Partners.
Hey, this is Dave Elmy of ADC Partners, and many thanks for stopping by to check out this episode of the Sports Business Conversations podcast. Just a quick reminder that you can find past episodes at adcpartners.com/podcast. And no matter where your sports business interests lie, I guarantee you there's an episode that's just right for you. Now, people say a lot of interesting things on this podcast, but this quote from Mark McCullers, the principal of the McCullers Group, really caught my attention. Here's what he said. He said, "You have to make the building sweat." So basically what it means is that if you're thinking of building a sports facility, you have to make that barn work as hard as it possibly can for your organization. I mean, you got to squeeze every last drop of usage and revenue out of that thing. A few people know more about putting a stadium through its paces than Mark, who's basically been a Peloton instructor for sweating buildings for the last 30 years. In our conversation, we discussed his extensive career in sports, beginning as an assistant stadium manager for venerable RFK Stadium during the transformative 1994 World Cup. We review his role in creating the first soccer-specific stadium with the Columbus Crew, his views on the intersection of sports and real estate development, and his advocacy of looking at stadiums as vital infrastructure and multi-use community assets. So thanks for stopping by and checking out my conversation with Mark McCullers, principal of the McCullers Group. Hope you enjoy. Hey, Mark, your first job in sports, you were assistant stadium manager for the DC Sports Commission, right? And that was the group that was responsible for venerable RFK Stadium, which, I think we could probably go into a little bit about that facility.
Dating me, Dave. Dating me.
Well, hey, look, we've been around the block. It means we've got a lot of important stuff to share.
Yes.
Right. So, but what drew you to that role? Because you had not been working in sports specifically at that time. So what drew you to the role, and how did it differ from other things you had been doing up until that point?
Yeah. So what attracted me to the role was I was kind of looking for my mission in life at the time.
Okay.
And I had a couple of jobs. My undergraduate degree is in computer science, and I had a minor in accounting. So I started out actually selling computers.
Okay. All right.
And then I worked, in the private sector, automating accounting systems for companies. So that base right there, sales and accounting finance, has served me well throughout my career. And in the mid 80s, oh, you have an understanding of computers? Yeah, we want to talk to you.
Yeah, it was really starting to explode at that point.
Yeah, that was helpful. What drew me to the industry was a relationship that I had when I was in Lexington, Kentucky at the University of Kentucky. And I knew the executive director of the Lexington Center Corporation, ran Rupp Arena, ran the convention center.
Okay, sure.
That really was my inspiration, was that quasi-governmental agency, and really more of a community focused that had this neat little sports and entertainment kind of, benefit.
Had you looked at sports before and said, gosh, I'd really like to sort of try that out? Or was it more to the point where you said, well, this is an opportunity that falls within a circle of things that interests me? What was that part of it like?
My father was a college football coach.
Okay.
I moved 6 times before I graduated high school. So one thing I knew I did not want to do would be a coach. But I've been around sports, college football all my life.
So you were sports adjacent all your life.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And so always, had a passion and saw where the opportunity to combine it with a career and business. So, my hometown's Tampa, so I was able to do an internship with the Tampa Sports Authority. Again, we're going to date me again, but the big sombrero. Tampa Stadium. And so I actually did an internship there, which led to the opportunity through relationships. And I believe relationships make the world go round. To have an opportunity to go to DC and work in a major market with major sports brands, at RFK, we did obviously NFL and the Redskins, but we did a lot of concerts and a lot of soccer. Really, I would say that's where I got my my soccer perspective, especially the '94 World Cup.
Had you been soccer interested previously, or was that event when the World Cup came through, was that your first sort of eye-opening experience with the sport as business opportunity that you could latch onto in the future?
I think I always saw it as a business opportunity. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, at Tampa Stadium, the NASL was still playing, the Rowdies were
Oh yeah.
playing there,
Boy, you want
you
to talk
know.
about we're
So
dating ourselves on that one. I'm nodding
yeah,
along,
it's
going NASL.
the
Woohoo!
die's already cast. So I think I saw it as the business opportunity, but really the '94 World Cup was like, oh, this is
Okay.
the product.
Yeah.
This is what the product looks.
You saw it fully baked.
It really, yeah, was some clarity on the entertainment value and the level that the sports played. And I always say it doesn't matter if it's basketball, soccer, hockey, whatever it is. If it's not played at a high level, it's not going to be entertaining. So that you tie that with the commercial components of that was the kind of aha moment.
And then Major League Soccer kind of springs out of the enthusiasm that followed the '94 World Cup, right?
Right.
So Columbus was one of the founding franchises, and then you had an opportunity to go to Columbus and the Crew. And what I'd love for you to do then is to talk a little bit about the growth of soccer in the US, because you were really out there at the foundational level, right? You helped build the first soccer-specific stadium with the Crew in '99. Now there's 26 of them. Actually, I had to look that up. That's not just a piece of knowledge that I have. Men's and women's game exploded. Team valuations are through the roof. I mean, you've been working in and around soccer for 30 years. What's your perspective on that growth, and where do you think soccer as a sports industry in the US is headed?
Yeah, I mean, look, again, I think the '94 World Cup was certainly, a seminal moment. We
Yeah.
talked about the NASL. I mean, for those that don't know, the NASL used to draw crowds of 70,000, 80,000 in the Meadowlands to see Pele and Kyrie.
Pele, yeah, the New York
I mean,
Cosmos.
so that product, even though NASL, and I won't get into why I think that failed, but it's why a lot of sports leagues fail because the owners can't help themselves from each other. So I said it anyway. But that seminal moment in '94, and it was very intentional. We got the World Cup in '94 on the promise to FIFA that we were going to launch a Division I league in the U.S. With the proceeds
Hmm.
from which we did. And look, it's a competitive landscape here in the U.S. It's competitive for commercial reasons. It's competitive for talent reasons. So I think was some catching up, and I think there's still that happening in terms of the quality of the product in the U.S. But I think one of the big differences I see between then and now is just the availability of soccer on broadcast.
Hmm.
But back then you could hardly find it. Now you have what, 3, 4, 5 networks that are dedicated to it. And so you just have a lot more access to the game in general, which I think is in part helping fuel the growth of the sport. But there's a sophistication factor, an evolution factor, I think, and we're seeing that in second and third division soccer now, where more resources are being put in, more investments being put in, investment in facilities, investment in players, and that investment is starting to show a return. So I think that soccer in this country, when you look at the growth potential of any sports property, is at a moment right now where you can get tremendous value for potentially a high rate of return.
It also feels like there was a moment where, like when you think about the NFL and you think about Major League Baseball, and we'll call them the quote unquote Big Four, the valuations of those teams have gotten so preposterously high. Right now, private equity has to get involved and help underwrite them. Soccer 10 years ago was still a place where if you had some money and you wanted to have access to a sports league, soccer was able to attract a level of investment that 30 years ago was the level of investment that you needed in the big leagues, quote unquote, again. So is that part of it as well? Do you think, like, that groundswell of available dollars and people wanting to see growth combined with the broadcast opportunities and the visibility of the league, did that really help spur things along as well?
I think so. I mean, all of those things, interact with each other.
Yeah.
Ratings are obviously dependent on eyeballs. Sponsorship valuation is dependent upon eyeballs and attendance and
Hmm.
things of that nature. So, when you boil it all down, it still comes to, basic economic, principles of valuation. But there is a factor in sports, community is a reason people invest. Ego is a reason people invest.
No.
So it's not always fundamentals, although fundamentals are becoming more and more important. But, I think one of the things that I find very interesting about soccer, and if you look at the sport globally, any market can have a pro soccer team. And I think that soccer is going to build out. We're second, third division men, first, second division women. I don't see why we're not in fourth, fifth, and sixth divisions in this country like the rest of the world.
So you still think there's a lot of room to grow? A lot of communities out there that can support a pro team?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes,
oh. Well, I think that might actually lead to the next question, because you were president GM of the Columbus Group for a while. I mean, I think about 10 years before you stepped away and launched the McCullers Group. So first and foremost, I'm interested, as a guy who'd been working for sort of bigger and like more established sports organizations, you become an entrepreneur. This is, I think, the first time, right? You really step out, like, this is plant your flag, do your own thing. I mean, I'm wondering how that experience has been for you in sort of planting your own flag, and how has it met or not met your expectations?
Well, I've always been entrepreneurial at heart. In fact, it's one of the things I loved about working in Major League Soccer at that moment in time. You could be very creative. We're forming how this wants to be,
Mm-hmm.
and I really, really enjoyed that. My wife is a private business owner. She's had a company for 26 years now. So I've always been entrepreneurial, and soccer's really given me the platform to try to flex those muscles, if you will. And so, when my tenure with the crew finished, and 10 years is plenty long enough for anybody to be in a president position of a professional sports organization, let me just say that, I could have moved. I could have gone to another front office,
Sure.
but I've been there, I've done that. What's my next challenge has always been kind of my career path. And this is, I tell people, this is the only part of my career that's going according to plan, actually.
That is not something a lot of entrepreneurs say.
Well, no, but, so I saw the opportunity, and and specifically saw the growth in second and third division. And I have, strong relationships with the folks who are running those leagues. So yeah, I was challenging myself and putting myself in a position to learn and grow in a space, getting outside my comfort zone a little bit, to your point. But one of the things throughout my career, I just enjoyed building things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, it is.
And so building teams, building front offices, building stadiums, building communities, it's kind of in my DNA, I would say.
Well, let's talk about the McCullers Group a little bit, right? And I looked on the website, and you position as sports and real estate. Okay, very, very definitive, right? And you were quoted in the SBJ not too long ago saying that during the last decade, sports and real estate industries have begun to interact in a sustained way, and this is what I want to underscore, for the first time. And I found that particularly fascinating. So what I want you to do is tease that out a little bit. Like, in your mind, what was keeping those industries more or less apart to this point? And then what was the catalyst that started bringing everything together so that you saw the opportunity there?
Interesting question, and I would go back in time and say,
Let's do
again, when I was coming into the business, quasi-governmental agencies, publicly built sports facilities that had professional tenants. And then, the business model had those owners starting pushing for more amenities, more costly, venues and things like that, which required private investment. So I think that evolution right there, where we moved away from this public sector. And look, if I could get the public sector to define sports facilities as infrastructure, which they should, my life would be a whole lot easier. But
I want to interject here, because I think you just said something interesting. It's like they should consider stadiums as infrastructure. Why is that the case? Why do you believe that cities and governments would be better served looking at facilities that way?
because I think it's a valuable asset, and it's not just a valuable asset for the professional sports team owner, although it does add value.
Sure.
When we're working on these projects and talking to political and business leaders in the market, we're putting together and showing them the whole value proposition. So the projects that we're working on are multi-use facilities. Okay.
Right.
So it's a community asset. It's not just a professional soccer stadium. And we really also bake in public use into the venue. It's a community asset, and we want to activate it. I say we want to make the building sweat. there's a whole lot more value than just to the pro team is my point. And there's value to the community in terms of brand. There's value to the community in terms of broadcast that's coming out of there. So there's just a whole lot of value that these projects bring and what makes them worthy of public investment in addition to economic impact and job creation and growth.
I think it's a really interesting point in how people think about stadiums now, because I think particularly folks of, my generation, right? The vision of a stadium is this bowl sitting in the middle of a vast parking lot outside city center somewhere, right? It's the old ashtray style of stadiums that we have in our mind. That's just not the case anymore. I love the expression, we want to make the building sweat, because you're talking about it working in a variety of different ways for municipalities and communities and the way people can engage with it. It's not just 8 event days at a football stadium, wash your hands and go. A modern stadium is quite a bit different than that now. And as you look to some of the things that you've seen, what are some of the things like that fit that description that you see as that evolution that really stand out in your mind?
Well, the stadium has become part of the real estate transaction. I mean, there's no differentiating, the stadium is part of the real estate development. And, just my career, I started out as the stadium development guy, but, in public financing and tax increment financing, you've got to have the development that's going to generate that increment. So in some markets, we got stuck because we didn't have a developer that was ready. Plus, we're building models so that the owner can participate in that. And that changes the whole economic condition from just the team in the stadium to, the entire development.
But I think it's also interesting to note, you've got a ton of experience in soccer, but the McCullers group really allows you to branch out into other areas where you can take the fundamental experience you have in soccer and apply them to other sports, entertainment, and developer projects. I'm wondering if there's other verticals that you're uniquely excited about as you start to think about where the McCullers group is going to be headed, and then how does soccer prepare you for those? What's the circles that overlay?
Well, look, and just as a business, prudently, we're looking at our growth opportunities and diversifying our business model. So we don't want to be too siloed in soccer,
Sure.
although I do believe in soccer, as you might imagine.
Don't want to get siloed, but you want to make sure you keep close to where your experience lies. And clearly, this is a new business, so we got to figure out how to open it up.
There's several verticals, that we're looking at, and in particular, colleges and universities, education in general, potentially even K through 12. And we have some of our team members that have some experience in development in education. So, but in colleges and universities in particular, the value proposition that I was talking about with cities applies to colleges and universities. They are a community, and their constituents want the same thing. They want an experience. They want amenities, and the colleges and universities also want revenue opportunities, for land. If they own land and the land's not producing, well, let's talk about how we can, make that asset work for you. And then all the other intangible values that I talked about apply to colleges and universities as well. Sports tourism is an industry that's just burgeoning and is going to continue. And I can't think of a market that we work in or that we're aware of that's like, yep, we're good. We got plenty of sports infrastructure. We got enough field. We're good.
No need for anything else. We're good.
Never heard that. So, that continuing growth of sports tourism and youth sports is going to require more infrastructure. So, that's high on our radar. I think events on the event side of things, because we do event management and also, event sponsorship generation and things like that. I mean, we're looking at emerging sports, rugby, cricket, things like that.
You also talk to, I imagine, a number of groups and organizations over the course of your week. You talk about colleges and universities. Stadium development isn't always in their wheelhouse of expertise, right? So as you start to think about how these folks go to start building out new facilities and establishing it, what are some of the things that you advise them on so they don't get tripped up? What are some of the common mistakes if somebody says, oh, we need to build a stadium? Where do they start? I don't want to say where they start going wrong, but where are like the simple unforced errors that you see and go, I could have helped you
Well, the
with
first thing they should do is go to McCullersGroup.com, if I can say that.
in the industry is what we call a plug. That would be a
That'd be
plug.
my first recommendation. But seriously, site's where we always start. Everything emanates from site. And so, I see owners that have already identified a site. Maybe somebody's already sold them on that site, and they've got all their eggs in that basket. And my advice to them is you should have at least 2, 3 sites running parallel, because
Don't get too locked in.
too many times people have told me this is the situation, and it's not the situation. And then you're starting from square one, and you lost a lot of time and money. So keeping options open. It also provides you leverage in negotiation.
Yeah.
So that's one that's key. The other thing is not being properly funded. I mean, these things are not for the faint of heart. They're expensive and they take a lot of time.
Yeah, they've gotten more and more expensive as they've gone too.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this ties into I'll say, expertise. So if you don't have the bandwidth or you don't have the expertise and you don't know this process, then you're going to be inefficient and you're going to cost yourself money at the end of the day. So knowing what funds are necessary and how those funds need to be applied, we're going to need a lobbyist most likely if we're going for a public-private partnership.
Yeah.
We're going to need other sorts of resources, maybe PR, certainly legal. So, that's what we do at the very beginning is put together that pre-development budget and say, look, you need to have this, because if you're not funded, then you're going to struggle. And then access to capital, Dave, and relatively cost-efficient capital, I should say, and qualify that, and financing and underwriting is hard with these projects, depending on, is it a commercial real estate development? Is it a stadium? What is it?
Well, it's also we talked about previously. These buildings are not just stadiums anymore. Like the expectations have grown exponentially as far as what they're going to do, and part of that is due to fandom. Right, the nature of fandom is changing pretty dramatically too. Right, from the standpoint of it's like the idea of sitting down and watching a game in your seat for 3 hours is sort of almost like a quaint idea of a bygone era. Like people want broader experiences when they go to sporting events. Right, they want to move around. They want to take in different views. They want the sporting event is almost like the thing which everything else is built around. So I'm wondering, like, as you look at developments. And you look at how teams and organizations are addressing them, like what are some of the trends that they're keeping an eye on to make sure that these buildings stay relevant?
Yeah, well, I would start with, these developments are destinations, and that's the whole point, is to create an experience. And I would argue that my career has been all about creating experiences. And so you have to take that, from the moment you hit the property to the parking attendant, all the way through to what's happening inside the stadium. All of that experience is relevant. But inside the stadium, it's a social experience. It's a social event, and that's what makes it unique from sitting on your couch at home. And I always say there's pockets of communities within a stadium. There's a family area, there's a supporters area in soccer, there's a corporate area, these sort of. So you have these social enclaves, within the stadium. You need to lean into that and make sure you're helping deliver that experience for those folks.
And it can't be happenstance, right? It's like these are things you need to have on the front end of your development expectation.
Very intentional, must be very intentional. Technology is a big one. What happens from a technological standpoint and how that is delivered to the fan, in their experience, in their seat, on their phone.
And that's a balance too, right? Because you want to have it, but you don't want it to be necessarily intrusive, right? It has to be almost organic to that process. We want to make sure like you've got all the things like bandwidth and capabilities and things like that. But bridging that gap and what that looks like and what technology means is really important to establish on the front end what the fans want.
Yeah, I mean, it's all part of that experience that you have to craft and curate. Some of it you want to have happen organically. I think especially with supporters in soccer, they don't want to be managed,
No, they don't.
So some of it happens organically, but a lot of it is very strategic and intentional to create those experiences that are going to, cause people to make the investment and in both money and time.
I brought it up earlier that, sports, particularly when we talked about the Big Four, right? It's making the transition from billionaire plaything to investment opportunity. Private equity is involved, in all the major leagues now. Ownership groups are becoming more sophisticated. right? They're bringing people who've been around sports for a long time. How does that impact development now as people stop looking at it from look at my sports team, isn't this adorable, let's go to sit in the luxury suite and watch the game, to how's this performing, how are we going to monetize it, what does that look like from a financial perspective? How does that impact it from where you sit and as people start thinking about these kind of developments?
Yeah, it's very timely because we're talking to some private equity firms and some things like that. And I said earlier that ego and community. Well, there's no ego and community with those guys. It's all about IRR.
Mm-hmm.
And is this gonna hit the returns that we want? And that makes it challenging, but it causes us to be creative. So we combine the commercial and the sports aspects of this whole model to show that IRR that's going to be attractive to investors. But we got to generate more revenue. And that's really the bottom line.
My guest is Mark McCullers. He's the president of McCullers Group. Mark, I want to thank you for spending the time today. Fascinating conversation regarding stadium development, how that's changing. But before I let you go, I got to put you in the lightning. Okay. You don't know what's about to happen. It's going to be madness. So do you feel like you're ready? You feel like you're ready for this?
Lay it on me.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Pretty bold. All right. So Mark McCullers in the lightning round. In your opinion, what current sports stadium has the most uncomfortable seats?
Oh, without question, the Rose Bowl.
Is number 2 not even close?
I don't have a number 2. I went to the Super Bowl at the Rose Bowl years ago.
Oh, yeah.
I had about 15 inches for my butt and about 15 inches for my knees. I was in the middle of a row of about 100 seats, and I was seat 49.
You weren't going anywhere.
Once I got up to go to the bathroom, I didn't come back.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. All right, what's your go-to food order when you're at a game?
I like brats. You can't do any better than a classic stadium brat. I'm kind of a traditionalist, old school guy, so that's where I would go. That and a good cold beer.
It was done intentionally. Very good. All right, you can buy any soccer team in the world. What would it be?
Oh, I'm an Ajax guy. So when in the '94 World Cup, the Dutch team was one of the teams there in DC, stationed in DC, and I traded my RFK polo for a pair of wooden Dutch shoes. And since then, I've been a Dutch football fan, and Ajax Stadium there is another one that I wish I designed. It's amazing. But that's the team I'd like to have.
Do you have the clogs on right now, or are you doing this interview in the wooden shoes?
No, sir, I'm not.
All right. All right, last one. This is a tough one. This is trivia-ish. All right, you're a University of Kentucky grad, as we established. So true or false, the Wildcats football team has a over 500 record in bowl games?
True.
You're right. True. They are 8-7, barely over 500. Mark McCullers, thanks very much for the time.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the One-on-One Sports Business Conversations podcast. If you enjoyed it, we always appreciate a subscribe, share, comment, or like. And don't forget, you can always find past episodes at abcpartners.com/podcast. This podcast is written, produced, edited, and hosted by Dave Almy. And theme music was composed by Scott Holmes.